Hey everyone, hope you guys are doing well. This is FPL Fran, we're back with another video. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 27 transfer plans as we look ahead towards a week where, honestly, we don't have any stresses to deal with. It's a simple game week where a lot of our players will play. There are quite a good few fixtures on hand, and of course, if you're looking at, for example, my team and how it performed in Gameweek 26, it wasn't so good. It wasn't so good at all. We did wild card. In the end, we actually dropped all the way back to 852 in the world, and that's that, right? We don't really mind. It is a red arrow, the first red arrow we've had in a while. We've had a lot of luck, and when luck goes the opposite way to where you're headed, that's totally fine. Sometimes take it on the chin. A lot of people had to take hits, but somehow I've been completely outscored by most of the field, and that's fine. Douglas Luiz scored a brace. Bowen got his first career hat trick. Some other things happened as well. Ait Nuri, for example, who was close to be on my draft, was someone that I took out at the end, just because I wanted to sort of punt on Neto, and things like that sort of change the sort of structure of your draft, and it happens, right? We always, I, for example, have 5, 10, 20 variations of wild cards that are running through my head. The one that actually I executed at the end didn't work out so well. So this is the team at the end of the day. This was the wild card. I'm not too worried about it. Obviously, Flecken, pretty horrific performance away from home, but we do have him mostly so he can play in Gameweek 29. I think Neto is actually a pretty competent keeper, and of course, we look at ahead for some pretty good Bournemouth fixtures, a double in Gameweek 28. The team is relatively well set up for the double Gameweek 28 as well. The Tony punt did not work out, so of course I will be sort of ruining Solanke versus Burnley away, but we also have Tony at Chelsea at home, which I think I actually would rather keep at this point in time. Transfers are quite precious. Solanke, of course, has the double that I want to keep him for, and I'll be keeping Solanke for that. In terms of the midfield, we've got Neto, Fernandes, Hee-Chan, and Saka. Now, of course, Hwang and Neto completely sort of did not work out this week, but I still think that going ahead that there's still good picks. We also have a Newcastle fixture, and then of course a really good Fulham at home fixture, right? And these are still bottom half defenses. I still like the chances of Neto and Hwang. We also have to sort of simply assess what is going on with the FA Cup fixtures. So that is one of the key things in mind, where I think if a lot of you guys this week actually have not many issues to deal with, first of all, you can think about sort of the short-term gain of maybe playing around some of the double game weekers in Gameweek 28. If, let's say, for example, there's a Bournemouth player that you can bring in, even if it's Solanke, for example, or let's say Neto is a goalkeeper that you can bring in to sort of replace some of the assets that you think aren't doing so well for your team, but you want to sort of capitalize on the short term, having to maximize, for example, on a Burnley player, it seems to be very, or a Burnley fixture rather, in the case of a Bournemouth player, is going to be very good for you. At the same time, I think one thing we can say is these FA Cup fixtures could lead to some pretty crazy upsets. You might have the chance, for example, to revisit whether you want to go for, someone like a Newcastle player like Isaac, for example, because I still think, for example, their offense is something that we can get some value from. Potentially even Trippier, even though I know clearly we do rate them as a poor defense, he still is one of the better assets that's in the game, just simply because of how attacking he is, particularly versus weaker opponents. When it comes to Arsenal, of course, I think a lot of up are tripled up now, particularly with this week where you had a chance to, for example, maybe take a hit to go for an Arsenal player to get that sort of starting 11. And I don't think we need to really budge on Arsenal, right? Ultimately, they have two good fixtures in Gameweeks 27 and 28. There's no need to really touch these sorts of players. We just want to see exactly what the upsets are. With, for example, United players, I think, of course, their performances are on and off in the sense that, yes, of course, they won 4 games in a row before they lost to Fulham. But even over the course of the season, we've been mentioning them as a poor team. But it still doesn't mean that, for example, when the fixtures aren't good, that they're not worth going for. I think this is a good example where even, for example, with a team like West Ham, you can see, for example, today, someone like Bowen is still capable of getting a hat-trick despite going on an extremely cold run lately. Someone like Eze, for example, a few weeks ago only got a brace for Sheffield United despite having a pretty poor season in terms of the outcomes of things. And still, I think it's worthwhile to always target fixtures like this. So I'm not too worried about how things have sort of ended up for me. Pretty happy to have Son. If I was to, let's say, line up my team next week, I think clearly I have maybe one issue with, let's say, Pau Torres. We need to assess what's going on with him. I know that Emery basically mentioned that he himself subbed himself off, but he's due for a scan. And that scan, whenever we hear the word scan, it's not really a good thing, but it also probably means that I might be able to get Pau Torres for one of his fixtures. So we're talking basically, if we can get, for example, the Game Week 30 game versus Wolves at home, that's nice. Maybe we can get Luton away, but I still think that unless, let's say, Emery gives us the all clear, it does make sense for me to go with Senesi versus Burnley away. This Burnley team have actually been one of the 2 bottom sort of teams within the league in terms of expected goals. So we actually still value them as a really poor defense or offense rather. So the same way, for example, a Wolves defender would have been good last week. I think anytime you have a defender versus Burnley, it actually makes a lot of sense. So, of course, congratulations to people who also went for Crystal Palace defenders as well. But yeah, I think it makes sense for me now to sort of consolidate over Neto and Senesi, play them here, particularly with the Pau uncertainty. Fernandes will probably drop to my bench, but I could very well make one of the transfers for, let's say, Hwang or Neto to one of the players within the game that could be quite interesting. For example, let's say Richarlison as well. We do consider, for example, Crystal Palace to be a good defense, sort of bad offense team. But over the course of the season, and particularly with the change in management, we could argue that there could be a shift in styles. And of course, the manager has mentioned that he's more attacking. They scored 3 goals, partially because of the sort of 10 versus 11 nature of the game versus Burnley. But we can also see what exactly happens. I think it might make sense to punt on some upside. I even have the chance of, let's say, going for a defender. Let's say if Pau, for example, is confirmed to be out for a few weeks and he's out for Gameweek 29 as well, that could very well be a transfer to a Udogie if he's fit in Gameweek 27. Now, if Porro is back, which I think would be quite a shock for a lot of us, then Porro can easily slide into my team. Otherwise, I think this team can also be rolled, right? We're looking for a transfer, of course, later down the line for Solanke. It might be through Tony, it might be through Haaland. We'll have to reassess on Gameweek 28, but that's basically the state of my team at present. When we talk about, let's say, transfers that other people can be making, I still think it really depends on your sort of free hit 29 versus free hit 34 strategy. For example, let's say you're catered around free hit 29. It does make sense for you to actually continually invest in, let's say, maybe if you don't already have a triple up on City, you can still go for a triple up on City. For example, a defender for City can still work out quite well. For example, Ruben Diaz, I still think maybe at this stage of the season, particularly when we're seeing Stones come back and his ability to sort of shift Walker onto the bench at times when, let's say, Man City want to rotate, still suggests that I think Diaz is probably the least sort of rotation prone defender at times. At the same time, you could also be looking at, for example, still going for a player like Son. Now, if you've also recently sold Palmer, fair enough, because the last 2 fixtures have been awful on paper, I still think this is a good opportunity to buy back someone like Palmer. The nature of FPL isn't so that we can kind of keep some sort of ridiculous hoard of cash within our bank. It makes sense to, for example, take transfers towards someone like Palmer if you need a midfield transfer. At the same time, of course, if you can simply access Son, you can go for him. Or, Salah, of course, the biggest prize in FPL, I suppose, that we can go for. It also depends on, let's say, whether he's been able to sort of manage his injury. We know, of course, that he's sort of back in training. We're not exactly sure if he's back in full contact training, but I think another point of concern that I would like to mention is because he wasn't part of the squad versus Luton at all, or rather versus Chelsea, it does make a lot of sense that Salah probably wouldn't feature too much versus Nottingham Forest. I think the case, of course, is that they don't want to re-aggravate his injury very seriously, and it probably makes sense to take a bit more of a measured approach from a sports science point of view with Salah, and therefore I think the allure of Salah is slightly lost, right? Because you also have the Man City fixture on the horizon as well. So, for example, for people making transfers, if you were, let's say, on the flip side of the equation, let's say you're planning actually for a free at 34, I still think it makes sense to just simply go for these Spurs players that I've been talking about. Maybe Palmer doesn't make so much sense because, of course, you're looking at a Gameweek 29 blank, but who knows? If let's say Chelsea, for example, lose to Leeds in the FA Cup, suddenly Palmer becomes a very interesting transfer. Although I will say that Palmer playing versus Arsenal away isn't exactly a good fixture in Gameweek 29. However, it still means he's going to play. It still probably means that he's going to give you appearance points, and that still gives you sort of the allure of going for Palmer as a pick. We also have the chance to go for Maddison Richarlison. We unfortunately haven't had that much time seeing Maddison Richarlison lately. Of course, we did see an early substitution for Richarlison last time out, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's a bad FPL asset. I still think Richarlison, for example, is still ludicrously priced in FPL, and even though he might play on the wing or even in a central forward position, I still think, considering that he actually has really good fixtures, with exception to maybe 28 versus Aston Villa, that he's quite a good pick going forward. So these are a lot of things that we want to sort of consider right now. And of course, when we talk about Palmer, I mean, you might be watching that Brentford defense and just thinking, why not, for example, go for a punt for a Chelsea midfielder? And I think that would totally make sense too. So Solanke is a good priority option as well. I might even roll, as I said. I think that's totally fine in FPL. Sometimes we might want to wait a little bit more to make a decision. I don't necessarily need to make a decision because I think I've already put my team within a position where it's still strong for Gameweeks 27, 28, and maybe it might make more sense to sort of see what I want the direction of my team to head towards in Gameweek 29. Because I think the most interesting thing about FPL now is, considering how important Watkins and Saka are towards our teams, the question of actually whether you can afford a structure that has, Saka, Salah, Son, Haaland, and Watkins is really debatable. A lot of people don't have the team value to do that. I might just be able to do that, and that, of course, requires me selling Tony, bringing Solanke into the team as well, and sort of changing things around. But I think it's very hard for me to do so. But also, for example, I would even argue that, let's say, because of the free hit path that you might be going for, someone like Palmer could easily be replaceable with Son. So I don't think it's necessary that you have to go for the strongest team in terms of the amount of premiums that we have right now. I think, yes, of course, Salah is extremely valid, but it still makes sense, once again, to respect his injury timeline and also to respect, what you can do with your cash in the short term. So don't lose sight in terms of the short-term games, and don't look too far ahead. Of course, we could always do a simple transfer, like whenever Watkins finishes his run of games versus the bottom half, whenever Watkins reaches basically game week 31, for example, you don't necessarily want Watkins, in my opinion, for this run of games here, which includes, City away, Brentford at home, which of course is a nice game now when we're looking again, reconsidering, but Arsenal away, sandwiched within there as well, and then Brighton, Liverpool, these sorts of fixtures, even to close out the season with Crystal Palace away. So it does make sense, of course, when you're planning for Game Week 31 to understand that there might be a bit of a template and structural switch within a lot of FPL teams where we might be, for example, dropping in someone like Watkins. We might at the time also own someone like Solanke, and we actually have, let's say, someone like Adebayo, just for example, holding a spot in our teams, but not really considering, the value of Adebayo necessarily. But actually, we have enough cash, of course, to simply just go for Salah within a team like this. And I think this could be a very interesting sort of structure of an FPL team that could ride out the end of the season very well. Palmer, of course, can replace Neto here in this situation. Depends, of course, whether I want to keep, let's say, Neto or Hwang, and of course, how their performances and minutes develop going forwards, particularly with, let's say, the Cunha injury, and even Sarabia, for example, let's say, playing well, deserving and getting more minutes. So things like that could be worth looking into. And of course, this could be the structure of a generic team that could be very strong within the 31 plus landscape. So I think one thing that we need to do as well is just be cognizant that things will need to change as soon as we get more information around the doubles and more information around Blank Game Week 29. And the next fixture opportunity where we get more information after these FA Cup fixtures, for example, will be around Game Weeks 29, 30, 31. We don't exactly know when the sort of TV announcements and dates will fall, but we will get more information later on about the picture of Double Game Week 34 and even Blank Game Week 34. So I think that's quite interesting. Just a sort of thought experiment right now to sort of see what the structure would be like in Game Week 31. I think it would be very much similar to this. Potentially the defense, of course, would be quite different. But as you can see, we have enough transfers getting towards Game Week 31 where we can actually still pull that off. Because right now, for me, this is just a -12. But I'll have transfers later down the line that I'll make that will probably allow me to get into a draft structure like this. So that's something that's quite interesting. I think when we talk about, let's say, Watkins as well, we said it a few weeks ago where I think it's very hard to sell him. It is a luxury transfer. And potentially I could also be looking at Solanke like that and we're sort of regretting that move. But I still like, for example, the chances of getting to target the West Ham defense. Ultimately, for example, 2 Brentford strikers scored. None of them were Tony. And that happens, right? When people have crazy hauls, I don't think it's necessary for us in FPL to completely overreact to that. It's okay to sort of just practice a little bit of sanity. In terms of captaincy this week, I think once again, a lot of people will be reacting to how well Arsenal have been lately, but also sort of how goal shy the City team has been. I still think, though, that this United team look horrific and they actually have a lot of defensive injuries. So for me, I'm still tempted, in my opinion, to go for a Haaland captaincy. I think it's very close between Saka, once again, probably another 50-50 this week. Hwang out of the equation, but you may even consider Son. I still like Haaland, though, just because, when we talk about quality of defenses, it's definitely between United and Sheffield being sort of the worst defenses, because you also have to factor in the home and away factor. I think City, of course, much better attacking at home. Any team basically defending away from home usually worse, unless it's like, Arsenal last season, which I think once again is a bit of an outlier. So when we think about things like that, this is a good opportunity to go against Haaland. Maybe another sort of week where there's 180% of Haaland, and if you like, for example, the punt of going for Saka, I think that would make sense. But those are my thoughts in terms of my transfer plans. I think it's very simple. As I said, wait for FA Cup fixtures, make transfers around, let's say, either the forward. Like if I really need to push that Solanke transfer for whatever reason, I can do that. Otherwise, I think it makes sense to just simply go for a Spurs player. If, let's say, the fixtures happen and let's say it's only Luton versus Nottingham Forest that actually gets confirmed for the Game Week 29 schedule, that's fine. We've got Doughty, for example, who would add another player on that week. And we can see what happens, of course, going forwards. But that's going to be it for my transfer plans. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.